What's up, guys? It's Rey-Jay back with another video. And in this one, I want to break down what's happening with SPY, Tesla, Nvda, the QQQ, and a couple of other tickers. And break down what's happening with the overall market moving forward, what earnings are coming out that are very important, what you should be watching for as time progresses. But just note that I am not a financial planner, so make sure you take nothing I say as financial advice. And also, if you guys can, please check out the Moomoo link. If you deposit $100, you're guaranteed 5 free stocks. If you deposit $1,000, you're guaranteed 15 in total. Not to mention 8.1% APY on uninvested cash. This offer ends in a couple of weeks. Anyways, now let's talk about what's happening with the markets. So when it comes to the way the market is moving, we saw some crazy manipulation over the last couple of days. Looking at Friday, we had a very bullish looking close as the market pumped very nicely, and we made an attempt to break above this channel. It's the first time we closed above this channel. So this is actually a very good sign that happened for the markets as we tried to push higher, at least from a technical basis. But instead, what happened was this was just manipulation. So they pushed us above the resistance at that 563 area to make it seem like SPY was going to pump higher. And then they used that to grab liquidity before they ended up dumping things right back down. And instead of keeping this in a range between 556 and 563, what they did is they made us lose 556 to continue this dump. So this was just crazy trickery that happened on Friday. They made everything look very bullish, only to dump things back down. So the market is very tricky, and that's why you always want to be paying attention to key levels. So that being said, what's going to happen now? Why did the market tank like this? What is going to affect this? I'll be talking more about some data first before I break down more details about these charts, because the daily is looking pretty weak for SPY, and so is it for Nvda and the others. Now, for tomorrow, it's going to be Wednesday, September 4th, 2024. Please note that there isn't really much data coming in except for 30 minutes after the market ends up opening. At 10 o'clock a.m. Eastern Standard Time, we have some very important jobs numbers coming out. We have the JOLTS job openings and job quits reports. Whatever this looks like is going to have a big effect on the markets. And remember, it's not always just solely about the data looking good or bad, but what kind of reaction we get from this. So what I mean is today, when the manufacturing numbers came out, right, the data was so. Some things were good, some things were bad. It was just in the middle. So what did they do? They ended up taking the markets anyways because of their own intentions. So the market is driven by these algorithms, cyclicals, and all these different factors. And what's happening is they're using data as another, pivot level excuse makers. So they're going to be using data as these excuses for them to just start selling really hard, to manipulate retail and do all kinds of crazy things. So you have to be ready regardless of what the data looks like. Sometimes there's a saying that says good news is bad news is good news, or even just, data just doesn't always guarantee anything. So I think that when the data comes out, whatever the numbers look like, it's going to cause a big move in the markets. And the best thing to do is just wait and see what the move is. Will this cause another dump? We'll be watching very carefully. Now, there was a big piece of news that came out that the DOJ is now investigating Nvda over an antitrust potential regulation that's been violated, which is very important. In my personal opinion, with this going on, this is going to be affecting the entire semiconductor industry. This is why we saw hundreds of billions of dollars leave semiconductors, which led this sell-off on its way down. This is what was leading the Nasdaq down. Semiconductors are taking a big hit because of this. Now, historically, September and October do tend to be more bearish months during election years. But something that tends to happen is September tends to start off strongly, quite decently. We even try to push a little bit historically during these election years. And then it isn't until like the middle of September when we really start to sell off. So that's the reason why I was saying, even like yesterday, that the market could hold up before we get the sell off. But instead, it's looking more like the sell off is coming early this year. And as soon as September has started, we're already starting this phase. Now, for other factors, the fear and greed index is currently at greed, but it's getting closer to neutral/fear. Momentum is quite neutral, not to mention the fact that the puts and call option ratio is going up because we're starting to see a lot more put buying than before. We're starting to see more shorts piling in. Now, volatility is also going up as the VIX is spiking. It's currently back in the 16s. So once again, that's trying to push up higher. For earnings, just notes that for tomorrow, we have Dick's Sporting Goods and Dollar Tree. Then on Thursday, we have Neo and a few others, not to mention Big Lots on Friday. So mainly just retail and a few other earnings like that. So that being said, what do I see for the charts? What is my personal opinion? Like I said before, we had this 556 to 563 range going back and forth, and we are starting to dip just a little bit. So we'll be watching to see how things go. Now, when you look at this, especially when you look at the daily time frame, we're looking a little bit more bearish as we got this big dip. Now, for SPY, here are some important levels. We're going to be looking at 550 as our key support. That's very close to where this gap support happens to be. If 550 fails us, I think we're going all the way down towards 547. That's close to our 50 EMA. And if that fails us, we're going all the way down to fill this gap down to about 544. So we'll be watching those levels very, very carefully, especially this gap down here. That's going to be very key for SPY. If we break to the opposite direction, you're looking at 553 as resistance, not to mention 556 and 558. We'll be watching to see which way we end up holding. In my personal opinion, it's very possible we rebound a little bit tomorrow morning, but then we may continue to dip lower because we are breaking below the range, which is a bad sign. And generally, when you start breaking below a range, you have a gap below. Usually, we do eventually fill that gap. So I do suspect we might be filling that gap very soon. So we might rebound a little bit to at least 553 or higher. Maybe for tomorrow, we attempts to rebound a bit, and then we'll see if we get a big rejection. If we get that rejection, we're looking for that gap fill. If we manage to break 553, we could continue for some time. But ultimately, whether it takes a couple of days, whether it takes another week, I think we might be filling this gap very soon. I think there's going to be a bigger dip coming. That's what I'm starting to feel looking at the charts off this bearish divergence that was developing and the big rejection we got on SPY. So I think that the daily is showing signs of contraction. We may rebound a bit, then continue lower. So watch for that very carefully on SPY. Make sure you watch the levels I called out. For ES, you want to reclaim 55.63 to turn back up to 55.80. If we get back above 55.80, we could turn back up. Notice how we had this range right over here where these two white lines are. We had that range. SPY was attempting to break through this range. So if you look at Friday's close, we were actually above the range trying to push higher. That's the first time we got that, which is why I was a little bit more optimistic. But instead, it was just a trap. They pumped us only to dump us back down. And we actually closed below the range. We closed below the range, which is a big sign of weakness. So if you're bullish, you want to break past 55.60. If you're bearish, you want to lose 55.13. If we lose 55.13, we'll be dipping all the way down to this imbalance, taking us down towards 54.80. So watch for that. ES is looking a little bit more bearish on the 4-hour and also the daily with this daily close. I think we will rebound tomorrow morning to get closer to the mid 550s. But watch to see if we get that rejection to really start dipping and drag down the markets to these imbalances. That's going to be a big risk, so make sure you watch for that very carefully. On SPX, something very similar happened. We formed a giant double top leg structure. We also looked bullish on the dailies. We pushed hard only to reject. If we reclaim 55.43, we could try to bounce a bit. If we fail to reclaim that, we'll be looking for a target of 54.80. So I feel like we might be rebounded and dipping all the way down to 54.80. So watch for that very carefully. For Nvda is also rejecting right here on the daily time frame. We're looking a little bit more bearish. I think that there is a risk of this dipping lower. If you want to turn bullish, you want to try to reclaim this 112 area to turn back up. If we don't reclaim 112, we're at risk of dipping. Because of the big news involving the DOJ, we are still looking very bearish on Nvidia. We saw this thing drop 10%, and there is a risk of it dipping even lower. Even in the after hours, we're still dipping. So I wouldn't be surprised if we start dipping to the low 100s, unfortunately, and I think that this could drag the market lower. So Nvidia still looks bearish to me nonetheless. For Bitcoin, we need to get back above 59,500 to bounce. If we lose 57,000, I think we're at risk of coming all the way down to the wick here, closer to about 56,000 flats, followed by the 55,000 range. So I think that there's a risk of downside looking at the 4-hour and daily time frames. We could rebound a bit and start dipping, and I do see a risk of us dipping all the way down to the lower 55,000 area. For other factors out there, we also have Tesla. Tesla's once again dipping lower. In my personal opinion, I think that we had a high. Ended up making a lower high. So for Tesla, we pushed up to about this 220 area. We were trying to hold up after all the bullish news involving the new potential Model Y with 6 seats. There was some reports about that, not to mention the fact that their Chinese sales went up over 17% relative to the previous month. But it wasn't really enough for Tesla to really bounce. We tried, and then the whole market dragged Tesla down lower. So it's not looking that good. This could be forming kind of like an inverse cup and handle. It's one possibility. One could also argue we still have an inverse head and shoulders, so Tesla should be fine. So it's kind of mixed right now. I presume that what's going to happen is Tesla's going to get tighter and tighter, and it's forming a very, very nice range here. So if we do break past 212, we're looking for 215 on Tesla. If we don't reclaim 210, we're going to be likely dipping down to 206. That's going to be our 200 EMA. If 206 fails us, we're going to be revisiting these lows. So you want to be very, very careful. We do look more bearish now after this kind of close came with the wick on top, but I think we could rebound in the morning, and then we may dip lower closer to 206 if the market does get a dump. So be careful with Tesla, guys. It may pop and drop, and I think that's very, very probable. For NQ, we look more bearish. We are barely at support at 19,000. If we do rebound, we're looking at 19,200 as resistance. And if we end up failing at the 19,000 area, we're looking for a dip all the way back down towards 18,000 and 750. So I think that We're at risk of dipping lower. We're looking more bearish with this daily close. And I think that there's a risk of us dipping to like the mid 18,000s. So I'll be watching to see if that ends up being the case. The QQQ, we look a little bit more bearish as well, unfortunately. The daily is about to get a PPO crossover. We got high volume. It's very ironic because we got a nice close on Friday. The market was trying to push. We saw buyers stepping in. We saw some big buy orders, but instead, it was just a trap for retail, only for them to dump things back down. Also, Nvda had some bad news, which led the market down. So that's why semiconductors were dragging the QQQs and the Nasdaqs down. So you're going to be looking at resistance currently at this 465 area. If we get back above 465, I think we could try to rebound. If we don't, we're looking at 460 as support. If 460 fails us, and we're barely holding that right now, if we end up losing 460, we're looking for this gap support at 455, followed by the gap fill at 451. I do think we might end up filling this gap now. We could rebound first a little bit into like the mid 460s before we continue lower. I still see the risk of downside, so watch your charts very carefully. For Aapl, we look more bearish. We have a double top leg structure. Look at resistance at 224 and our main support at 218. I suspect that we might be dipping lower. We could rebound to 223 and start dipping down towards that 218 area. And I do see a risk of downside nonetheless, in my personal opinion. For a few more out there, Palantir was trying to bounce. We were trying to get up to about 32 and we failed. So unfortunately, we didn't get up to our targets. To be bullish, you want to get back above at least 34.25, 31.25, excuse me. And if our support's at 30.38. If we lose that, we're going to be dipping to 28. This looks a little bit more bearish now because this looks like an inverse cup and handle. The move has failed, but we're barely holding support. So watch 30.38 as a support. If we lose that, we turn bearish. If we hold this, we could rebound, but there is a risk of this dipping down to about the 29 area. So what's ironic is Supermicro had some nice technicals as it was trying to rebound, but now it's still very weak because of Nvidia. So we saw a mix of buyers and sellers, which is why this was like pretty flat, if anything. So from how I see things, we are technically on a downtrend, but we're in a range now. We're in this very, very critical range. So here are the levels on Supermicro for those who requested it. 400 is going to be our very, very critical support. And I'm looking at this level right over here. This 430 area is going to be our next support. Our resistance is going to be very close to about this 450 range right over here. That's where we had that previous candlestick, followed by 464. And then our next resistance will be all the way up here around 485. So we have some tight levels up here. If we break 485, we fill up this gap above towards the 500s. And if we end up failing, we don't hold 428, we're going back down to 400. We're very choppy right now, but there is a risk of downside if Nvidia drops lower. So be careful with Supermicro. It may chop around and maybe dip a little bit later on. For Rivian, we were just trading sideways only to get a big rejection. So we needed to reclaim basically 14.6 for the turn back up. Our resistance is at 13.5, and our main support happens to be at the imbalance all the way down here towards 12.92. So I think what's going to happen is we rebound in the morning, then we dip down to 12.92, and I think it's very likely we come all the way down to that imbalance and start dipping lower. We may dip a little bit lower looking at the bigger trend. This once again looks like an inverse cup and handle, and we still have that gap to fill down here. So I suspect there's going to be downside coming to the 12s. I think we're going to see Rivian dip a little bit. So if I got a big rejection, unfortunately, but we're still holding this trend line quite well. So we'll see if this trend line holds. I think this trend line got adjusted for me because I'm using the daily chart instead of the 4 hours. Sorry about that, guys. If I were to adjust this on the daily, it would look more like this. We're barely at the support, very close to it. If we end up continuing to fail to hold above our yellow support trend line, we're at risk of dipping towards 7.16. If we hold above this, we could try to rebound for 8, but I do see a risk of us dipping all the way down towards the lower 7s. So I find that's to be a little bit more probable, so we'll be watching to see if that ends up being the case. So that's going to be very pivotal for the way things end up developing. For other factors out there like the IWM Russell 2000, the daily is looking a little bit more bearish. If we were to break past resistance at 215, we could bounce for 217. If we end up losing 212, we'll be dipping all the way down towards the gap fill for 208. So in my opinion, I think that what's going to happen is, the IWM is going to be dipping lower for 212. We'll have to see if that holds or not. If it doesn't hold, we're going to be filling the gap all the way down to 208. There is a high risk of that. I think it's a little bit more probable we do dip down there. We may start off tomorrow with a little bit of a push for the 214s, then we may continue lower. So be careful, guys. The chart's looking a little bit more bearish. AMD is looking very weak because of Nvidia. We're down 8% for the day. We came down to fill this gap. Since we got this gap fill, we're looking at this gap supports. Look at resistance at this 140 area. not to mention 143. And then our support is currently at 136. 136.5 fails us. I think we're dipping all the way down towards 133. So I do think that we're going to be dipping lower on AMD. We could rebound first and continue, so watch for that very carefully. On ARM, we're looking a little bit more bearish as well. We're looking at 122 as our support. If that fails us, we could be coming down to fill this gap for that 117 area. Looking at the way we closed, I was even talking about this yesterday, how this could dip a bit, but we got not only a small dip, but a much larger one as we're down 7%. And we're seeing the semiconductors industry just continue to affect this. So I think we're at risk of dipping all the way down to the lower 120s. Unfortunately, we're still looking more bearish, so we just have to favor what the chart's telling us now. Coinbase is looking more bearish because the trend on the daily is very weak. We weren't able to rebound back above our 200 EMA, and now we're barely at support at 170. So if we lose 170, we're going to be falling for, I'd say, like 162. There's 166 and 162 as supports. Our resistance is going to be at 170, followed by 174. But in my personal opinion, I think that there is a risk of us dipping lower all the way down for that low 160 area. So we still look more bearish, forming a bearish structure. We have resistance to watch for at 178, support at 175, not to mention 170. We're kind of stuck in the middle going back and forth and back and forth, but I see a risk of us dipping lower all the way down below 175 for lower levels. So I'll be watching to see if that ends up being the case. And I'm seeing some weakness developing on Amazon. But I just want to say that right now, Amazon's in the middle. There's a little bit of weakness here since we haven't been able to break resistance, but we're still range bound. If we officially lose 170, I will turn more bearish. And if we break 170, I could see this try to rebound. But overall, guys, we're just range bound completely, so we have to wait on this and give this some time. For Meta, we look a little bit more bearish. We're continuing to fall right now. I think we might be testing 506 tomorrow. Look at resistance at 516. I think 506 is coming. If that fails us, we're going all the way down to the low 500s. It looks like it had a bearish divergence double top. And I think that this is looking a little bit more weak in my personal opinion. So you want to be very careful with this double top like structure. For Microsoft, you look a little bit more bearish. We're going to be looking at 416 as resistance and then 405 as support. I favor it's going to be coming down to at least 405, if not the gap fill for 395. So 405 is likely coming at least. For Google, we look a little bit more bearish. We have resistance basically at 160. Our main support is going to be around 156. I'm favoring it's going to be dipping to at least 156, and we'll see how things develop from there. Now, for those who are interested in stocks like AMC and GameStop, this had a nice double top like structure, a double bottom like structure, but it got this big rejection. We're barely holding the 22 areas, our support zone. If we lose 22.23, we're going to be dipping all the way down to about 20. And if we hold support, we could try to rebound. I am favoring that it might be dipping closer to the low 20s. Still looks more bearish to me. AMC is also dipping. I think that we had to reclaim at least 4.8 to turn back up. Now we're at risk of falling to at least 4.5, then eventually 4.4. That's where we have these imbalances. So it looks a little bit more bearish. DJT got a big rejection as well. We're barely at 18. If 18 does not hold, we could be tipping all the way down closer to about the 16 area. So DJT looks more bearish on the daily time frame. For the VIX, we're starting to break out on the daily time frame, looking a little bit more bullish. If the VIX continues to hold above 17.4, we could see another spike in the VIX coming as implied volatility goes up, bringing premiums higher. The 10-year Treasury yield is looking a little bit weaker. We hit our 20 EMA only to reject right here. If we manage to break past 3.89, we could try to rebound. Otherwise, we're going to be dipping. This is dipping with the markets, but it's not really affecting us as much. On the dollar is trying to rebound, but I think it's very important to pay attention to this because the dollar hit support close to 100. Now it's trying to bounce. It did bounce off here historically, but we're approaching resistance around 101.96. So to me, it looks like the dollar will go a little bit higher. We'll see if it breaks off this or not. We'll see if the market gets a little rebound attempt when the dollar hits this. So if the dollar kind of comes down like this, the market may rebound a bit. But then if we continue to break out like this would be like bearish for the markets. Or if we just break straight through this, the market could just remain bearish. So we'll just have to wait and see. But that's what I'm saying, at least for the dollar moving forward. So that being said, guys, the market is absolutely bananas. We got that very, very strong close on Friday, a big pump coming. A big pump came that's really tricked a lot of people, including my own self. I was thinking that the market had potential because of how well we closed and because of how we saw a lot of big buy orders and such. But instead, they were just doing that to prepare for a big dump. So they ended up dumping us below our key supports. As long as SPY is below 556, we're at risk of seeing a bigger pullback. If we reclaim 556, there could be an attempt to bounce. But right now, still looking more bearish. The daily charts are contracting. We are favoring the downside move, in my personal opinion. So that being said, I just want to say I thank you all so much for listening. Please have a great day, night, or evening, wherever you guys are around the world. I'll most definitely see you guys very soon, the next one tomorrow morning. See you guys tomorrow. Don't forget we have big data coming out with the JOLTS job openings and job quits at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And just remember, the market could be very tricky sometimes. It's just full of manipulation. And with all these crazy moves, it's always important to be very adaptive. You have to be able to adapt to these new environments and to remain optimistic and put your heads up nonetheless. So keep your heads up, guys. Don't worry about what happened today. Today is finished, and tomorrow is going to be a new day. So let's start very strong. Let's improve, and let's never ever give up. Thank you for listening. Get ready for tomorrow. I'll see you guys tomorrow for another update, and peace out.